Joining us now, Tim Miller, former communications director for Jeb Bush's 2016 campaign, writer-at-large for The Bulwark and an MSNBC political analyst. Philip Rucker, the Washington Post national editor and an MSNBC political analyst. And NBC's Vaughn Hilliard with me here in studio. Okay, Vaughn, Donald Trump has a history of never forgetting, but also sometimes seeming to forgive people who then come back, sometimes crawling into the fold, right? I understand you've got some new reporting about what's going on now.
Right. Donald Trump is always eager to welcome his old enemies back into his camp. And in a way, you know, that's where Nikki Haley last night in her announcement there at the Hudson Institute turned heads because along with our colleague Ali Vitale, we're reporting that Trump advisor and Nikki Haley advisor are both telling us that the two individuals, Nikki Haley and Donald Trump, the old Republican rivals, have not spoken since she dropped out of the Republican primary back on March 6th of this year. And so she did this on her own accord. The Trump camp has not heard from Nikki Haley directly. And for Donald Trump's efforts, he has not tried to, you know, extend an olive branch and bring her on board. So she did this all on her own. I want to let you listen, though, a little bit more to how she's justifying her support of Donald Trump and her vote for him in November. Take a listen.
I put my priorities on a president who's going to have the backs of our allies and hold our enemies to account, who would secure the border, no more excuses, a president who would support capitalism and freedom, a president who understands we need less debt, not more debt. Trump has not been perfect on these policies. I've made that clear many, many times. But Biden has been a catastrophe.
Nikki Haley setting this up as a choice of Biden or Trump, much like the echoes that we heard from 2016 when Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz and others were also making their justifications for why they were supporting the man who one time attacked them so mightily.
Am I misremembering, Tim? Was she the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations? And am I misremembering, has Donald Trump kind of sided up to leaders of Russia, North Korea, China? What's in this for her?
Yeah, you're not misremembering. This is what's happening here. It's pretty simple. Nikki Haley thinks she has a future in the Republican Party. She looks at Liz Cheney, she looks at Adam Kinzinger and sees that they don't. And if she goes full Liz Cheney and decides to strongly oppose Donald Trump and maybe eventually endorse Biden, she won't have a future in the party. And so what she decided is that she wants to have a future in the party, and she's backfilling the rationale from there. Because as you point out, like those rationale points are preposterous. Like the idea that I want someone that's going to stand with our allies, so I'm going to support Donald Trump, who's just bleeding this morning about how he wants to work with Putin. Just this morning on a social media feed, you know, I'm going to be for Donald Trump because I want to lower the debt. Donald Trump increased the debt more than any president. I'm going to be with Donald Trump because I want somebody that's for capitalism, like Joe Biden isn't for capitalism, like companies aren't getting record profits right now. I mean, you know, look, you can come up, if immigration is your number one issue and a strong border and you're for deportations, mass deportations, okay, then that would at least make sense as a reason to support Donald Trump. But all the rest of those reasons are just kind of backfilling logic to get to the politically expedient result from her. And I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah, and it continues, right, a tradition of politicians who they themselves have been trashed by Donald Trump. He liked to call her bird-brained, whose families have been trashed and or lied about by Donald Trump, still come back. And her about-face comes after she said quite a few things about him as well. And I just want to remind folks exactly what she has said about Donald Trump. Listen.
Times change, and so has Trump. He's gotten more unstable and unhinged.
If you mock the service of a combat veteran, you don't deserve a driver's license, let alone being president of the United States.
We've seen him get confused. He was confused about me having something to do with keeping security away from the Capitol. He was confused when he said that Biden was going to run us into World War II.
He's not qualified to be the president of the United States.
So, look, I mean, it's not, as you know, Tim, unusual for someone who runs against somebody to, you know, speak not nicely or to criticize the guy or woman on the other side. This is different. And the New York Times reports there were a few audible sighs of disappointment when she said she would vote for Donald Trump. So the key question is, how many of her followers might actually take her lead?
Yeah, I think that's the key flaw in what she said, actually, that very phrase, my followers. She said, I think I have millions of my followers that Donald Trump needs to reach out to. Nikki Haley has like thousands of followers, maybe hundreds, maybe tens. There isn't like a huge Nikki Haley fan group out there. She has some, but not very many. Most of the people that voted for her were voting for her because she was the vessel for them to express that they are unhappy with Donald Trump, that they don't want Donald Trump to be the Republican nominee. Now, some of those people are like me, left the party, and we're hoping for a full change and will vote for Biden. Some of those people voted for her because they don't like Trump, they want somebody else, but they also don't like Biden. That latter group, that's the key group that Biden's going to have to reach out to. But again, these people were not Nikki Haley superfans. They're diverse. Some of them are very conservative. Some of them are very moderate. Joe Biden's going to have to find a way to get to them and without Nikki Haley. And I think that's very possible because this isn't like there's some cult of Nikki Haley out there. That's a very small group that's not that relevant.
So, Phil, the Biden campaign did release a statement saying in part that nothing has changed for the millions of Republican voters who continue to cast their ballots against Donald Trump in the primaries and care deeply about the future of our democracy. Some of them may be even those critical, true, independent voters. Where do you think they go now? Or maybe a better question is, do we know where the Biden campaign is in terms of strategy to win them over?
Yeah, well, they're certainly up for grabs for the reasons that Tim just articulated. And the most telling sign is as these primaries continue, there are elections in a lot of these states week after week. There's no active Republican primary going on right now. Obviously, Nikki Haley is on the ballot, but she's not an active candidate. And yet still in these states, you're seeing 10 to 20, sometimes more than 20% of the Republican electorate going for Nikki Haley. And that's purely a raw protest vote against Trump. And so those are the voters that Biden will be trying to win over the course of the next few months. You already see the Biden campaign trying to win over some of Nikki Haley's financial supporters, her big donors, trying to court them. And I think you'll see at the Democratic National Convention in August a real push to try to make the case for why the Biden tent should be expanding to take in some of those traditionally Republican voters who can't stomach Donald Trump as their nominee again.
Any sense, Vaughn, of what Trump might say tonight? He's got a big rally. What are the chances he brings this up and, is happy to have her back over where he thinks she should have been in the first place?
Well, interestingly, the question is, I think, does he give her even a shout out or a head nod and give her any sort of acknowledgement? Yeah. Does he think that she is worthy of that? Again, when she hasn't even placed a phone call to him, we are told. Look, he hasn't dedicated even one single...
I mean, a lot of people, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but a lot of Republicans, when they change their minds about Donald Trump, make a trek to him, often at Mar-a-Lago, right? And she hasn't picked up the phone.
That's
Good
correct.
Point.
He hasn't even posted anything on his social media account since she made that announcement here last night. For Donald Trump, people ultimately come back to him because that's where the power structure is within the Republican Party. We have seen that time and again. And look, he offered her a cabinet position one time. Could he offer it again? She may have to do a little bit more. And there's a Republican National Convention in July that you could very well expect to see Nikki Haley being there, again, if she actually has the interest of running again herself.
So, Phil, Congressman Richie Torres, who represents most of the South Bronx, where Donald Trump will be tonight, this is a economically challenged, largely black and Hispanic area. He told MSNBC how he thinks his district will respond.
I'm confident that the people of the Bronx are not going to buy the snake oil he's selling. I mean, his presidency was a catastrophe for the Bronx. His mismanagement of COVID left a death toll of more than 7,000 in the Bronx, which is greater than the combined death count of Pearl Harbor and 9/11. So instead of holding a rally in Crotona Park, he should be apologizing to the people of the Bronx for the damage he's done.
Is that the message, Phil, that Biden and the Democrats need to put out there?
Well, they're certainly trying to. I mean, Biden and the Democrats are having to play defense at a moment like this to try to hold on to as many black and Latino voters as they can as Trump makes this play in the Bronx tonight. But just keep in mind, even though the rally is going to be taking place in the South Bronx, many of those supporters there for Trump could well be coming from other parts of the state, even from other parts of the broader region. There are certainly parts of the New York City metro area that are more Trump-friendly, like Staten Island and Long Island, than the South Bronx. So I don't think this is necessarily he's only going to be speaking to people of Congressman Torres's district.